Welcome, Dr. Sousa. Thanks for spending some time with us today to talk about your new book, Differentiation in the Brain. Please tell us a little bit about differentiation in the brain.
Well, this book was based essentially on taking a look at Carol Tomlinson's model of differentiation and then deciding what new things cognitive neuroscience has discovered with regard to the four major components in Carol's model. That model says that teachers can differentiate instruction either by what they teach, that is content, or how they teach it, which is a process, how they assess learning, which we call the student product, and the environment in which that all occurs. And I'm well aware that there's been a lot of research going on in educational neuroscience and some research in each of those four areas. So Carol and I talked about this, and it seemed to make sense to bring together what neuroscience has to say about these components of the model and use that to support the kinds of strategies that we suggest teachers consider when they're trying to differentiate the classroom.
How does this book differ from the other books you've written about educational neuroscience?
The other books I've written, apart from the general book, which was How the Brain Learns, these books were written either for a specific type of student. For example, one of my books is How Does the Gifted Brain Learn? Another one is How the Special Needs Brain Learns. Or the books have been centered around a particular topic, such as how the brain learns to read, how the brain influences behavior, or how the brain learns mathematics. In this case, we focused, as I mentioned before, on those four areas of the model: what to teach, how to teach it, how to find out students have learned it, and what kind of learning environment is ideal in which this happens. So this book focuses essentially on those as opposed to the topics in the other book.
How is the book structured to benefit educators, and who is your target audience?
Well, the book is designed to talk about the basic components of what it means to differentiate a classroom, and then to show how the research in cognitive neuroscience supports this approach. So we go through a fairly detailed discussion, citing the research projects, citing the research studies that were done, so teachers have access to the actual research studies that we were discussing. And then what we do is say, well, in light of that research, these are the kinds of strategies that would make sense in translating that research into educational practice. So in each chapter, we talk about the component, we talk about the research from cognitive neuroscience that supports it, and then we talk about how to translate that into practical strategies. And our target audience is all grade levels, really, primarily, of course, pre-K through 12. But I think this book would be a valuable asset for teacher training institutions as well, because teachers who are coming into the profession now in the next few years are certainly going to face a greater diversity in their classrooms. Diversity in terms of language, diversity in terms of culture, diversity in terms of ability level, and they're going to have to deal with that broad spectrum of diversity in their classroom. So I think teacher training institutions would also find this a valuable text to use in exposing teachers to what differentiation is all about, and in recommending strategies that they should consider when they are teaching in a very diverse classroom. I also think that this would be valuable for college professors to consider in their own classrooms, because after all, as our society in general gets more diverse, college classrooms get more diverse. And in some cases, some college classrooms are the least brain-friendly classrooms I've been in. So I think this would be a valuable tool for college instructors to look at and see what are some strategies that I can use in my context, in my environment, to make the learning of my students more productive and more effective.
What is the importance in today's classroom of understanding how the brain works?
Well, you know, when you think of a teacher's main job, the teacher's main job is to change people's brains. I mean, that's what we do. That's what educators do. Teachers are essentially brain changers. And so every day they try to change their students' brains by giving them new information, by helping them to build new neural networks, make new connections to things they already know. Principals and school directors are trying to change the faculty's brains to try to expose them to new information so they can learn new strategies and learn new things about how we learn. Principals are trying to educate parents, their own children. We're all teachers in one point or another, and as teachers we are brain changers. So it seems to me that it makes sense that the more we know about how the brain learns, the more successful we're going to be at changing that brain. So in the last 15 to 20 years, the research in how we learn has begun to just grow exponentially. And it would make sense to me, I think, that if my practice, if my job is to change people's brains, then I have to look at my own knowledge base and say, what do I need to add to that? What do I need to incorporate from this new research that can help me be more effective in the classroom? So the importance is enormous. And it's going to continue as time goes on, because we are developing new kinds of imaging technology that can give us even more information about the brain and how it learns. And I think that's going to be something that teachers who want to be effective, and I think most teachers want to be effective in what they do, if not all of them, they'll need to be aware of what's happening in these fields.
Could you describe some of the research that went into differentiation in the brain?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we looked at the 4 ways in which teachers can differentiate in the classroom. And so taking each one of those, we looked at the research that was out there. For example, let's start with the first one, content. How much can you present in a lesson? How much information do you present? And at what level do I present that, given perhaps a wide range of abilities in my classroom, and also perhaps a wide range of native language speakers. I may have students from different countries whose native language is not English, and I have to consider that certainly when I decide on how much content to put into my lesson. Now, in terms of neuroscience, we know that that when the brain is learning something new, that's happening in working memory. And working memory is a temporary memory, and it has a limited capacity. So what we've discovered is, over time, for reasons we still don't understand, the working capacity of working memory seems to be declining. We used to think it was about 5 to 7 items at one time. Now, the latest studies seem to show that it's more like 3 or 4 items at one time. So I think teachers need to know this, because there seems to be, the curriculum just seems to be growing exponentially. And so teachers feel they have a lot to cover in the same amount of time. So when you have to cover more information in the same amount of time, you go faster. You just put more stuff into the lesson. And this may be very counterproductive if working memory has only a limited capacity, say 3 or 4 items, and the teacher says, well, there are 10 things we have to learn today about World War II, that lesson's already in trouble. So what we're trying to say here then is maybe the research is telling us it makes more sense to have a fewer number of items and to go greater in depth with those fewer number of items, so students make sense of it, they see meaning, they can make connections to past experiences, and that's the kind of connections that we need to make in when we're learning something new, to ensure that a high probability that it will be saved in long-term memory. Then we looked at process. How do I teach? We certainly know from years of practice that some strategies are more effective than others, but we didn't always know why. And I think what the neuroscience is showing us, what the brain research is revealing, is why some strategies work when they do, and even more importantly, why sometimes they don't work when we try them. So the neat thing that the neuroscience is adding to the strategies and the techniques that we have is the why. And when you know why something works and doesn't work, you can be much more masterful in its applications. So the research is helping to explain why it makes sense to present more important information at the beginning of a lesson and at the end of a lesson, because those are the times where we remember things the best. It gives us information about the importance of emotions when we're presenting information. When emotions get involved, there's a tremendously greater probability that information will be stored and learned. So neuroscience is helping us understand which strategies are likely to be more effective than others. The third component is, of course, product. How does the student's product, how does the student demonstrate back to the teacher that he or she has learned what's been presented? And typically that's been paper and pencil, the test, the pop quiz. And we know that many students aren't that good at telling you what's in their head, how they learn through paper and pencil. Some do it better through music, some do it better through drawing, some do it better by demonstrating it, some do it better through writing, through poetry. And so what we encourage here is recognizing that the brain can tell the world back what it knows in many different ways, and that teachers should consider not just relying on paper and pencil tests, in fact reducing that, and allowing students a broad variety of choices in which they can express back to the teacher what they have learned. And finally, learning environment. I mean, we really have not paid that much attention to the environment which learning occurs, especially in secondary schools. I think it happens more in elementary schools, but in secondary schools, especially with so much information that has to be taught in the curriculum, teachers tend to be very businesslike. They get that stuff out there. We got to cover all this stuff between the first quarter and all the stuff in the second quarter of the academic year. And so they pay a little attention to the emotional climate, for example, in the classroom. The social climate. There's a whole new area of neuroscience that's emerged called social cognitive neuroscience, where we understand the importance of how the social aspect of kids interacting with one another can enhance or in some cases impede learning. So teachers have to give greater, especially in secondary school, give greater emphasis to recognizing the social component, and they can do that, for example, by having kids work together more often, cooperative learning. And I'm talking about true cooperative learning, not just putting kids together helter-skelter in groups, but finding it through the cooperative learning process. Those can be very beneficial, especially in a diverse classroom. Cooperative learning is one of the most effective strategies we've ever had. It's been around for 35, 40 years. It's been well researched, and it just can be extremely effective if done correctly and done properly and done regularly. Then that can be a tremendous addition to the learning environment. So the research that went into it was looking at all those four components and finding out what has happened up till the point where we published a manuscript that can support those components in the classroom.
While researching this book, were there any findings that surprised you?
A couple did. I mean, I had some suspicions about them, but when I was forced to really get buckle down and look at the research, there were two particular things that surprised me. Number one was the number of students in a recent survey that expressed how bored they were with school, especially secondary students. Not so much in elementary, although middle school begins to show up. But in high school, amazing, over 3/4 of the students who were interviewed in this really wide study, I think of over 4,000 students, if memory serves me correctly, said that the school wasn't meaningful to them. They learned more outside of school than in school, that they didn't find it challenging. And what was particularly of concern to me was the exit interviews they did with dropouts. And it turns out that a good portion of kids who drop out of high school don't drop out because they're poor students, that they have low ability. They drop out because they don't find high school meaningful to their lives, that it doesn't meet their needs. So they're giving us a strong message here. Students are telling us that we have to do something in schools and in the classrooms to address the very different needs that students need in order to be successful. Times have changed. Our culture has evolved. We have a much more diverse culture, and teachers who are still hoping for the 1960s classroom are just not going to be successful as much as they can be in today's schools. So that was one of the things that we talked about in the book, and to emphasize the need for teachers to really think of new ways to address student needs. And I guess the second thing that I found particularly interesting, and again, I suspected it, but this was, looking at the research was again surprising, and that is the number of students who feel, either because of what their parents have told them or what their peers have told them or their teachers have told them, or any combination of those, that they have a fixed ability, that, that they were born with a gene set that said this is as bright as you're going to get, it ain't going to get any better than that. So they don't try any harder. When they hear, when their parents says to them, well, I couldn't do math in school either, so maybe you didn't get the math gene. I mean, that's just nonsense. And so this is called having a fixed mindset, a belief that no matter how hard you try, you're not going to do any better. But the truth of the matter is the brain has incredible plasticity. One of the things we've learned from neuroscience in the last few years is how plastic the brain is, how the environment can influence its growth. And so this notion of intelligence as being a single and fixed entity is just not acceptable anymore. So we try to encourage a growth mindset, the knowledge that if you're not getting it, work harder. Find out what the reason is. Don't just say, well, I can't do it because I don't have the ability. Maybe you're just not putting your talents together in the right way to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. So I think what surprised me was the large number of students who believe that they have a fixed ability and therefore can't do any better compared to those who do have a growth mindset. Because those who do have a growth mindset, I mean, they do very well in school when they apply themselves. And teachers say, I'll help you, I'll work with you, but you have to put the effort in. If you think it's locked up and if you can't do anything, you don't make the effort. But if you believe in the truth, which is that your brain can grow and you can learn new things and be successful at them, then students work harder and they achieve more. I guess those were the two things that really surprised me.
What emerging trends do you see in educational neuroscience?
Well, I mean, I'm surprised where we are now. When I thought 5 or 10 years ago where we'd be, I never thought we'd be this far along. I think the trends we're seeing is a growth of a knowledge base about how the brain learns. And this has been remarkable. First of all, it's helped us to look at students who have learning difficulties, learning problems. The trends toward understanding dyslexia, for example, have just been mind-boggling. We now can help students tremendously who were diagnosed with dyslexia and help them become better readers because we didn't exactly understand what was going on in the brain that caused this disorder. Now we do, at least in many students. And by using certain protocols, using the computer, interventions, it's amazing what we can do to help those students who felt that they didn't have much hope become better readers and become successful readers and successful learners. That's one area. The understanding about attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, we're getting great insight into that. So these students can become more successful in schools with certain interventions. And even giftedness. We have not had much research in this country until lately on what's the nature of the gifted brain and what can we do to make sure that our bright kids don't get left behind, because I worry in this era of, excuse me, of no child left behind, that some children don't move forward either. So we're looking at the gifted brain and what are some of the characteristics of it and what are some of the things we can do in school to find kids who may be gifted in certain ways but don't know it, and the school hasn't been able at this point yet to help them discover it. I think there are more things we can do to make that happen. So I think that it's an exciting time to be in education. It's exciting because, granted, our classrooms are becoming more diverse, but at the same time, the good news is that we are learning more and more about how we're learning and how the brain learns, and therefore we can be more successful at how to teach.
Thank you for sharing additional insights into your book, Differentiation and the Brain. Is there anything you would like to add or expand upon?
Well, I think the one thing I'd like to add is for those people who are teaching now, look, it's a tough job. You know, I think of the opening line to Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. You know, it's the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think it's perhaps for a lot of teachers the worst of times because never has the public demanded so much of schools as it does today. We don't just teach kids anymore, we raise kids. For many kids, a school is the only safe place for them to be. It's the only place where they get recognized. Not that their parents don't love them, but in some cases they're just too busy trying to keep the household together. And so school has become a very important place for a lot of students, not just a learning place, but a place to grow up, to get to know yourself and to understand your place in the world. So this puts a tremendous burden on the school and on the people in the school. And it makes the job extremely difficult and stressful. And that's what makes it the worst of times. But I think it makes it the best of times because never before have we known so much about how that brain works, how the brain develops, how kids learn language, how they learn math, how they deal with their emotional problems, how they become socially acceptable to the people around them, and what they do to garner that social acceptance. So in many ways, educational neuroscience is developing more information for teachers so that they can develop more strategies and more tools for them to be successful. And though it's a tough job, I think educational neuroscience can help teachers work smarter and not just harder. I think that pretty much covers it.
Thank you for your time today, Dr. Sousa.
You're welcome. I enjoyed being here.